right, so thanks for coming, everybody. This is my second public talk, so this is like, I'm like the substitute teacher here. This is my first one. You don't have to read anything. This is more for me. I would recommend taking notes if I go past something and I don't deeply explain it, because some of this stuff requires a little more information, but I can't go too deep on everything or I'll take about 5 hours, so can't do that. So if it seems incorrect, I want people to challenge me, like don't trust, verify, right? Like you shouldn't trust anything I say, you should question everything. So I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. I'll try to leave room for that. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm attempting to verbally describe Bitcoin. When we're out in the world, we don't have charts to show people, you know, stuff like that. And someone says, well, how does it work? If you don't have a good understanding, you might struggle trying to explain Bitcoin to someone else. So I'm going to try to explain enough about Bitcoin just using words so that you can build a mental model in your head of what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why should somebody care about it, so that if the question ever came up, you might be able to articulate it in a way that makes sense for them. So hopefully it makes sense to you folks when I say it. So no charts, no outlines, no bullet points. The further reason, let's see, offer illustration. All right, so at the end, why does Bitcoin matter? The social significance of it all. That's like why anybody should really care. So that's the reasons why I'm doing this. Let's get into it. So so what is Bitcoin? Most people are going to think of Bitcoin as money, so I'm going to use the analogy of money as the main thing that we discuss when we talk about Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is essentially a tool, as money is a tool. And like a hammer, all tools have things that, you know, parameters. They're made for a purpose. So money is made for a purpose. There's limits they have, you know, what they can do. Like a hammer can hammer nails, but it also can pull out nails. But you can't paint a building with a hammer, not well, right? So money has its limitations. It can be used correctly or incorrectly. Some people are really good at using money, and they accumulate lots of it, and others can't seem to hold on to it. So they don't know how to use the tool of money. Same with Bitcoin. You got to learn how to use this particular form of money or Bitcoin. So again, I'm sticking on the topic of a tool. It can be used for good or bad. So you can hammer nails with a hammer, you can hit someone over the head. That might not be so good. And you do need a skilled operator. So even with money, we have to know how to use it. And with all tools, you gotta, if you want to use the tool to its best capacity, you gotta learn how to use it. So Bitcoin is a tool. It's also a messaging system. So number 2 here, I have under A, ones and zeros. So in the digital realm, for anybody who's not familiar with how computers work, we talk about ones and zeros. That references what we call binary computer code, and I don't know how else to phrase it, but the ones and zeros represent electronic or electrons flowing or not flowing through a circuit. That's what ones and zeros are. And we, in the binary realm, so when we count, we use 10 digits, and that sucks. I thought that was noise in the hallway. I have no idea what to do to the sound. Oh, Paul's coming back, awesome. I'll keep going since the noise went away. We count 1 to 10, and before we get to the next place, we use 9 or 0 plus 9 digits for the first place, and then we move to the next place. In binary, there's only 2 slots for every place, and then you move to the next place. So 1, 0, then you go 1. So you got 0 or 1 in the first place, then you move to the next column, and you have 1, 0, then you can have 1, 1. But that's it, that's 4 combinations. Then you have to add another place. So in binary, you're using ones and zeros, or electricity on and off, and patterns of those ones and zeros. So within an electronic circuit, there are these little gates that do different things, and the computer can read the sequence of the electrons flowing or not flowing through a bunch of circuits, and represent that as a number, a letter, a word, a pixel, a sound through this digital thing. It gets transferred into all the things we see in the digital realm. Excuse me. Bitcoin is no different. It uses these ones and zeros, and it sends them around in a closed-loop network, and essentially they can be looked at as messages, because these ones and zeros could be turned into words or images or any other thing that ones and zeros could be turned into. So it can be a type of language. This messaging system can speak. It has a type of speech. It communicates, in our case with Bitcoin, a type of value or the ownership of that value or those digital ones and zeros, that message. Who owns it? Who can move it? So we have this messaging system, and it has rules for creating, sending, and ordering those messages, which is number 3, the protocol. So Bitcoin is a protocol. It's a set of rules that can be trusted to obtain, thank you, Paul, a desired result, right? So within the protocol, this set of rules, everybody has agreed to run the same set of rules on all these computers that talk to each other. A couple of the rules indicate that there will never be more than 21 million of these digital files, these messages. And for each message, you can break them up into 100 million smaller units we call sats or satoshis. So the protocol has a bunch of rules for moving this value or this information and for storing this value or this information. So the rules have to be followed, and everybody can verify these rules within this protocol. It's part of the way it works. And it also keeps track of the sequence of events, something called timestamps, the blocks that we talk about that are part of the blockchain, and something that I'm going to get to called mining, are all things that are used to sequence this information moving around within this protocol in this messaging system. We value those little messages like money, but they're simply digital messages. And the protocol determines how they get handled. Now, some people consider Bitcoin digital gold, and that's because these messages, they have properties just like digital gold, or just like gold, I should say, in a digital form. Something that all good money has is scarcity, portability, divisibility, fungibility, recognizability, verifiability, longevity, and in our case with digital files, teletransportability, which is not a word, which gold does not have. You can't teletransport gold around the world, but you can send these digital files anywhere. And they have all these same properties as gold. They're scarce, there's only 21 million. They're very portable, they get moved around all over the place. They're divisible, we have 100 million units within each one. They're fungible, everyone is just like every other one. They're recognizable, you can verify them yourself. Gold is much harder to verify. It is verifiable, but much harder. Bitcoin is super easy. Longevity is something that gold has. It never rusts away. In the Bitcoin network, these UTXOs, what we call the unspent transaction outputs, I'll get to that, which are the Bitcoin, they're never going away either. Right? They're out there. Now, you can lose the ability to control or move them, but they're always still going to be there. So hopefully that all comes together later. Now, the big thing that we call Bitcoin, we call it money. So that's number 5. We now have money in the best form possible. Hopefully at the end of this, you'll all agree if you don't already. Money does a few things. It can store value, right? And in order to store value, it needs to be secure. You need to be able to know that it's stored and you're not going to lose it. So Bitcoin has that security feature. It can transfer value. So money has 3 basic functions: store value, medium of exchange, unit of account. So the second one, medium of exchange, needs liquidity to work well, and we are seeing that happen in the Bitcoin network. The more and more people that own Bitcoin, the easier it is to move it around and use it as a medium of exchange. But at some point, it's already happening, some people value things in Bitcoin, denominated as a unit of account. One day, the whole world, I believe, will be valuing Bitcoin, valuing things in Bitcoin, using it as a unit of account. Most people today still do a calculation to say, well, how many dollars is this thing worth in the form of Bitcoin? So we're using this 2-tiered system right now. But one day, I believe Bitcoin will be the world's unit of account, and then it will fulfill all roles for money for everyone someday. It fulfills these roles now for some people, but not for everybody. I believe Bitcoin offers freedom because of the fairness and the openness of it. So monetary systems of the world have been corrupted by a few people that could get to control the rules and everything else. Bitcoin is super fair in that way, and it allows for a lot of personal freedom, in my opinion. And it's one of these reasons. Well, it's not so much how Bitcoin works, it's almost like a result of what Bitcoin is doing, so maybe that's in the wrong spot. The last thing I have on the list is a first principle that's always been with us. So this can get a little deep. Because it's math, I believe it was uncovered, not invented. So everything we see on this planet was always here. It just wasn't in this form. This metal was rocks in the ground. Someone turned it into metal. This plastic computer was in the ground at one time, and now it's here. And so Bitcoin and the discovery of the things that make Bitcoin work were always here on this planet. Everything about it. Silicon was not in the form of chips, now it is. Metal was not in the form of circuits, now it is. Money was lots of forms, and now it's in the form of a digital type of money that we figured out how to make it work, but all the elements were always already here. So Bitcoin was not invented, nothing was invented, everything was uncovered or discovered. So now we're going to look at Bitcoin as a tool which uses a digital messaging system implementing an agreed upon protocol with properties of digital gold designed to be used as free market decentralized money meant to provide freedom to all to store their own productivity based on first principles that act on us regardless of our knowledge of them or our attitude towards them. So this is one of these things I love about the world. First principles act on us regardless of our knowledge of them or our attitude towards them. And they're acting on all of you right now because you are being held into your chair by gravity. You don't have to know about it, you don't have to care about it, but it acts on you anyway, and so does money. Now, money's not natural. We made it into what it is, but it's still a first principle. So quick history, Satoshi Nakamoto discovered Bitcoin and wrote about it in 2008. He launched what we call the white paper, and in 2009 he released the code, and then in 2010 he left. And he said, good luck folks, I'm out of here, which was very important. If you want to learn about the history of money, I recommend that you check out Nick Szabo's piece called Shelling Out. There's a link up there, but it goes through all the steps that money needs to go through to be considered money by human beings. I wrote here at the top, the most important invention humans have ever created. I should have wrote the most important discovery. I believe that it is. If money follows a path, it's what's called path dependent. Essentially, it starts out as a collectible. Imagine you're a tribe of people, somebody finds a shiny yellow rock on the ground, comes back to the village and says, look what I got, and everybody thinks it's cool. He hangs it on his neck and everybody wishes they had one. So that collectible nature is what creates the idea that something could be used as money, and humans had to figure this stuff out. What money does is it eliminates barter. It solves something called the double coincidence of wants, where two people want different things, not equal, and they can't just trade. So money fixes that. It has come in many forms: shells, teeth, beads, silver, gold, all the things we talked about before, the qualities of money, the scarcity, divisibility, all these things were tested against different things that could be money. And the thing that bubbled to the top was gold, because it had all those qualities the best. The other qualities could be fudged easier, and those types of money went away. Gold has now been compromised, and we now have fiat money. Bitcoin was, I believe, invented, discovered because of this desire to get money back to a sort of natural state like gold, where nobody controls it. And so we now have money in a new form, a digital form. By having money, humans have been able to divide up their labor and specialize. This is part of relating to number 2, which is eliminating barter. Essentially, money is the most saleable good. That means that with money you can buy anything, and with anything you can buy money. So it is the one item everybody uses. Not everybody uses horses or toothpicks, right? But maybe we all should, but money's in the middle of everything. And so it allows you to do one job and get really good at it and sell that for this thing called money and then buy everything else you need. So because of money, we're able to specialize, and everything we see around us is a result of money being discovered, the concept of money being discovered by humans, creating things to use as money, dividing up labor, and then we build everything we see in this world. Money is an irreplaceable, now it is a first principle of how we operate as humans. We invented it, we invented the construct of money, but now it's a first principle, it's allowed all these things. It also increases the overall wealth of everything through this specialization. You can accumulate a whole bunch of this money because you're so good at something, which can allow you to prosper into the future. So, I wrote here, the construct of money created by humans fulfills a natural desire to trade fairly this became a first principle of our human interactions, like truth or trustworthiness. These are not natural things, these are constructs, but we operate around truth and trustworthiness all the time, whether you're conscious of it or not. It's a first principle, different than natural first principles like gravity. It's a first principle of our humanity, as is the idea of having this thing, money. I said before, it acts on us and it affects how we behave. These things act on us regardless of our knowledge of them or our attitude towards them. So the better the money, the better it serves. Bitcoin is that best money at this point, and people that understand it are using it to serve themselves better. This is why I say Bitcoin is the most important discovery in all of human history. If you think about money being the most important discovery or concept that we came up with, which gave us all the great stuff we have, then the best form of money then becomes the most important thing ever created. So to me, Bitcoin is the most important discovery in all of human history. Beats the wheel, beats fire, beats it all. I could be wrong, it's an opinion. I do believe it's accurate. Anyway, let's get into how Bitcoin works. This is probably one of the things that most people don't understand well. So, we have a bunch of things. I got 6 points here. The network, messages or transactions, nodes, miners, signing devices, and private keys. So, the network. A bunch of linked computers that are all around the world. So, does anybody in this room not understand what an Excel spreadsheet is? Because I want to use this example. Okay, good. No hands went up. So, what's happening with this network? They're keeping track. The network keeps track of a giant Excel spreadsheet. This is the best way to visualize it. Let me just read what I wrote here, creating connection. All right, so the network is connected. So the network is a bunch of computers, literally, that talk to each other all over the world. Creating connections. I apologize, folks, I had to read my own notes to get back on track. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. All right, so they're talking to each other. They're moving messages around. We talked about the messaging system. And they're creating these things called blocks, and they're linked together to something we call the blockchain. I'll get into it a little deeper. The network is free to join and to participate in. The code is open source, and it is price agnostic, meaning this network doesn't care what we value these files. The network just cares that everybody using the network follows the same rules. So it is what we call a decentralized network, which means these computers, what we call also nodes, they're all over the place, and nobody controls all of them. It's decentralized, but they talk to each other, and they stay synced with each other. Excuse me. They use certain rules we call the protocol, which I mentioned before, to operate with and to create the security it needs. Now, a couple of these very specific rules. This is where it starts getting technical. I'll do my best to keep it untechnical. We use something called SHA-256. I'm sure most people have heard of it, maybe they're not sure what it is. SHA stands for Secure Hashing Algorithm. It's used by miners to add blocks to the network, and it's also used to generate public and private keys, which I'll get into. There's also another unique rule called ECDSA, which is called Elliptic Curve Digital Signature Algorithm. And this is a type of math, both of them are, SHA-256 is a type of math, very complicated. And the ECDSA is used to sign messages that get sent around this network using this protocol. So I wrote on here, switching to Schnorr signatures, which will provide smaller transactions and better privacy. So this gets a little technical, I'm not going to get into it, but we've been using ECDSA since the protocol was launched, and a bunch of smart people figured out there's this other signing mechanism known as Schnorr signatures, which finally got updated after years of discussion into the Bitcoin protocol. It is an opt-in feature. It's what's known as a soft fork. You don't have to use it, but if you use it, you will create smaller transactions and potentially give yourself better privacy on the network. The users of the world agreed we should add this in and make it a feature that if people wanted to use it. So it's more of this special math that's part of this network and how it works. So the network disseminates and arranges these transactions into what we call blocks. There are a certain block size that has to be adhered to. There are block rewards that come out of all this. their transaction fees, and their rules, all to conform to the consensus rules defined by the protocol. So this network is making sure that as they talk to each other, that all the rules are being followed, and it's disseminated between each other using these things called blocks that I'll get into. Now, some of these rules are immutable, right? So some of the rules cannot be changed, but some people can mess with, and it still doesn't break what we call consensus. So some of the rules that are immutable are things like the sum of the inputs must equal the sum of the outputs. If you try and make a transaction where that doesn't happen, people will look at that and go, I don't agree. I'm just going to kick it out. I don't agree. It's not going to happen. It's not going to get propagated around the network. There's something called a halving every 210,000 blocks. Everybody recognizes it. No one can stop it. I'll get into that a little bit. There's something called a difficulty adjustment. Again, nobody can stop it. That's every 2016 blocks, I believe, roughly every 2 weeks. Everybody on the network allows it to happen. Their software allows it to happen. It's what allows people to stay in sync, these certain immutable rules. Other ones, like the size of a transaction or the schema, which is the arrangement of the data in the transaction, has to be done exactly the right way or it gets rejected. That's part of the block structure. And then there's something called Bitcoin scripting language. Again, features that you can use but you can't mess with. They're immutable rules of the network. Then there are some mutable rules, or some rules you can change. So let's say you develop a wallet or a signing device that can help move messages around the network. Well, there are things about the way the wallet functions that will allow you to do it slightly differently, present it maybe differently, but the underlying rules are never broken. So there's things about the network that are fungible a little, but the main rules can never be broken. And that's what everybody's agreeing to by jumping on this network. It's an open source network, anybody can join. So the network, what else did I say here? It's allowing for communications, this network. And we talked about something called peer-to-peer, where you're transacting directly with somebody else. Instead of having middlemen, again, another feature of this network is the ability to talk directly with one other person within the network. So that's some stuff about the network. Let me go down to transactions now. Messages or transactions. So I'm using the two words interchangeably because transactions refer to value, messages refer to information. As I covered earlier, you can look at the network in both ways, but the network doesn't care. The network doesn't see value. I mentioned that before. The network sees rules. So we have messages, also we call transactions. So they're created by signing devices. Again, I'm using this word signing device / wallet. So the signing device refers to messaging, wallets refer to money, and there's a good reason to understand that they're both. Some people argue this is money, and then governments want to regulate it as money. If it's messaging, then it's free speech, and then governments shouldn't necessarily recognize it or regulate it. And there are many people out there, some of you may know who I'm referring to, one guy in particular, who hates when people talk about wallets and money, even though he's more than happy to refer to Bitcoin as money. So there's this weird gray area, but it's only because of politics. So I keep using the two words interchangeably on purpose. Now, these signing devices or wallets, they could be on laptops or desktops, they could be on mobile phones, they could be on dedicated hardware devices built specifically to sign messages within this messaging system using this protocol. So these are three different ways you can operate within the system. So the messages must be organized and created based on the protocol, as I said, using these signing devices. I talked about the valid inputs. There's something, the SHA-256. Everybody's checking this stuff. So whenever you're in this network, you want to communicate. Everybody checks to see if you're following all these rules. So your signing device is going to create these messages with all these properties. It's going to sign in correctly. It's going to use certain different chunks of Bitcoin we call UTXOs. It's going to use proper addresses so that, again, the network recognizes, hey, the guy's following the rules. This node, this computer over here that's trying to talk to us is following all the rules. And your messaging, your signing devices have to fit into all this stuff. The transactions are broadcast to the network, so nearby nodes hear the broadcast and verify. So what it's called a gossip protocol. So the computers that are linked to each other will constantly talk. You don't know that they're doing this. And every time that happens, every piece of information that comes into one of these computers that sees it as new, validates it. Validates the rules, validates all these things that I've been talking about. And so when you set up your own node, you want to join the network and set up a node, a computer that's going to talk to the system, you can do that, no one can stop you. And what you're going to do is you're going to ask the network, hey, I don't have this information, anybody have it? And you're going to start talking, gossiping back and forth. And so you're going to verify everything that comes in against the rules. You're not going to trust anything that comes in. So you set up a node and you say, I want to link with everybody, and your computer's going to do all this talking to the network. It's never going to take anything that doesn't fit the rules. Just how it works. As long as you have the right software, it won't. It will just align with everybody else. So one of the things that messages are, what's happening here is they get pooled into groups that are known as unverified transactions. So when you send a message out on this network, everybody sees it, they check it to validate the rules and make sure it fits the rules, but nobody says it's a definite message and I'm going to update my copy of that spreadsheet. So let me back up for a second. Imagine this big spreadsheet, lots of empty boxes, and somebody put some information in one box. Let's call it a number, and it represents some value in the real world. That information in that box is a Bitcoin. Now, somebody has control over that box on the spreadsheet, but nobody else, the person that has the private key. So when you send a message to the network, you're saying, hey, you know that number in box A2? I want to move it to B10. Now, everybody sees that message and goes, looks good, looks like he has permission, looks like he's following the rules, the address is good, all these things I mentioned, but we're going to wait. We're not sure if everybody's going to agree on this yet. So that transaction sits in what we call a mempool. It waits. It waits to be added to a block. So you've got, I'm going to send a transaction. I'm going to send some Bitcoin from me to this lovely lady right here. And the network sees the transaction, looks good, but nobody says, no, I'm not updating my copy just yet. I want to wait for the whole network to agree. This is the problem that was solved. It's known as triple entry accounting, where two people to a transaction always know the transaction, but nobody else usually does. But in Bitcoin, everybody else does. And so we wait for everybody else to agree. So these transactions sit and wait in something called a mempool. Then what happens is those transactions are put together by miners. These are special nodes on the network. I'm going to expand on this a little more. And they're hashed together in a race to get credit for the next block. I'm going to expand on this, so I'll let it go by with that quick description right now. So these transactions are included in blocks by the miners that are, when they get these blocks added to the blockchain, that's when everybody has agreed on those transactions that were in the mempool. The blocks are then sent out by the network, the nodes in the network, and the other miners, and then they're verified by everybody. So you might have seen the transaction come through, put it in your mempool, and then somebody says, hey, I created a block, and I want my block added to the chain. Well, that gets sent around, and everybody checks that information as well. And you go, wait, oh yeah, that transaction, and that one, they're in the block, okay, and the guy got it properly added to the chain, okay, great. I will now update my copy of that Excel spreadsheet, and I will make all the changes that are in that last block. And that's what syncs you with everybody else, so that every 10 minutes, roughly, every single node on this worldwide network has an exact copy of that Excel spreadsheet. So that's what's going on with messages and transactions. Let me go down to the nodes. I've been touching on this stuff. So each node is just a computer within a network. Anyone can run one. You can do it on a laptop or a desktop. You can buy this little device known as a Raspberry Pi. You can make one yourself. All this stuff is open protocol, open source, so nobody can lie to you. You can just, you can download the binary and compile it yourself, all this computer stuff. But none of this stuff can be hidden. That's one of the things about this network. Nobody can hide what's going on here, and that's why we're able to trust it. That's why they say don't trust but verify. You can verify all this stuff yourself. If you can't read and write code, you can hire somebody or go to school and learn. But eventually, you never have to trust anybody if you don't want to. So let's see, the nodes. All right, so every node eventually the idea of running a node is so that you can get the entire history of the blockchain. So when you start your node, you're asking everybody, hey, send me information. And what you're doing is you're rebuilding the entire blockchain from the first day all the way through. And as that information is coming in, you're verifying it against the rules. So unless it's what we call a pruned node, which throws away some older data to shrink the file, you're going to get the entire history of Bitcoin. Every single transaction that's ever made. What that allows you to do is know that anybody wanting to send you Bitcoin, you can verify where it started within the network, where its first birthday was, and you know that it's real, that somebody didn't interject some fake Bitcoin. So when you run a node, you're getting a copy of the entire history of Bitcoin. Very important, because this allows you to check your node for real Bitcoin, not someone else's. So this is like one of these major important concepts. The node syncs with other nodes to get the data, and then it begins recreating the blockchain. As I just said, it can verify the transactions and the blocks as it's going, and it does this as it's learning about all these transactions. And it takes, right now with a decent computer, it takes a week or two to get synced up with the blockchain. But once you're synced up, you're good to go, and then you stay current with everybody else. Some nodes listen only, and some broadcast as well. So some nodes don't want to be known, and they don't share their information, even though they can. They just don't want to be seen. So they just operate sort of in the shadows, but they're perfectly able to operate, and they can still receive and send transactions. They just don't have to sit there all day broadcasting their own history and helping everybody else catch up if they don't want to. And nodes can be mining nodes, right? So I touched on that a little. So a mining node does everything a regular node does, except that it does one other function, which is to attempt to add blocks to the blockchain. The blocks being a whole group of transactions in one group, and we're trying to get it added onto the chain. So let's go on to miners, right? Anybody can be a miner. So they run these nodes, but they do more than just verify the transactions, they mine the blocks. So they gather the transactions, they also have a mempool. Sometimes the mempool gets bigger than one block will handle, and lots of blocks worth of information get backed up in this mempool, but these miners are still putting them together, and what they do is they build blocks, and they use additional data, all based on the rules. Now, I'm going to get into something, this is a little bit technical. I'm going to explain SHA-256 in a way that hopefully will be very easy to remember. Now, if we take a math function, simple, 10 times 10, you're going to have 100. So the two inputs create a number that's, 3 digits over here. If you do 10 by 100, you're going to get a larger output. It's going to have 4 digits. That's going to be 1,000. Okay. What hashing algorithms do is they take any size input and reduce it down to a known size output, right? So the one thing you can count on is the size of the output will be the same size every time, no matter how much data gets crammed in. Very weird and important factor, because it has everything to do with how a miner gets credit for adding a block. So just remember, I can take the words "I love you," I can take the entire Bible, and I can hash both of them, and the size of the output will look the same size. Now, what you have to realize, I touched on this earlier, these digital files that are being hashed can be numbers, letters, words, sounds, anything in the digital realm, because everything in the digital realm is broken down to ones and zeros, or electricity flowing or not flowing in different patterns. Because it can be reduced down to a binary string of numbers, ones and zeros, math can be done to it. So you can do math on words, you can do math on images or audio files, because it's digital. So SHA-256 is basically doing math on a bunch of ones and zeros, and it does it in such a way that it keeps compressing it until it gets down to, in our case, 256 bits. What's interesting is that when you look at it in binary, it's just ones and zeros. You can't read it, but you can turn it into words or numbers or letters or a private key for a Bitcoin wallet. So, understanding what hashing does is very critical, because this known size output is very important to adding blocks to the blockchain, and I will get to that. So, imagine you're taking all this data, you're crunching it, and you're getting a number. Now, if I asked you to guess a number between 1 and 1,000,000, you have 1,000,000 choices. So it might be easier than if I asked you to guess a random number between 1 and 1,000,000,000, right? You have a lot bigger space to look in, so it's going to probably take you longer to figure out what number I'm asking you to guess. So the protocol is telling miners, look, if you want credit for a block, you have to produce a number that's lower than a target number. And so when you hash a bunch of information and it turns into numbers, you can look and see, well, are there a bunch of zeros in the beginning? So the more zeros in the beginning, the lower the number you're looking, the lower the number you have, and the amount of leading zeros is what is the factor that is being used. That is, the network is saying right now, for you to get credit for a block, you need to hash this data and come up with a number that's lower than this target, otherwise you don't get credit. So this gets a little crazy, but imagine computers crunching numbers all day. And they're saying, I got all these transactions, and they're in the form of numbers, and I've grouped them into a block. And now I'm going to run this hashing algorithm over the top of it, and I'm going to get a number at the end. And I'm going to say, well, is that number low enough? Is it lower than, does it have enough leading zeros to be low enough for the target? If it does, I can say to the network, hey, look at what I did. I put all these transactions together, I hashed them, I got the answer. Everybody needs to take my block and add it onto the chain. Now this could take minutes, even hours to get this answer. And everybody in the world that's mining is trying to get this answer. It's a race. It's not a complicated math function, it's literally guessing over and over and over. People say, oh, it's a complicated math function. It's not. The underlying math is complicated, but what it's simply doing is trying to guess and find a number. So now you got all these computers, they're running, they're running all this information through, trying to find this target number. Now when they find it, they can send that block out to all over the network, and in a millisecond, everybody can verify, yes, they got it, they got the answer. Now, if you're intuitive enough to have put together some of what I said that if you take a bunch of data and run it through SHA-256, you'll get a known size output. If you take the same data and do it again, the output will be exactly the same. Okay, you're a miner, you got a bunch of transactions, you run SHA-256 over them, you get a number, it doesn't count. Well, you can't just do it again, that's not gonna help. You're gonna get the same answer, you're gonna be wrong again. So what are you gonna do? Well, what they do is let me see if this is in the right order. None of that part matters. So I'm probably skipping a little because I'm going with out of my head versus my notes, but there's a thing called a nonce, a number used once. Now, what these miners are doing, they're taking the transactions that everybody sees. They themselves add this number used once, and they keep changing it over and over and over, because every time they change it, the output changes. Every computer that's mining is doing this and picking different numbers, and they may even have different transactions in their block. A miner can make a block of transactions that's different than my block. What matters is that I find a number that's lower than the target. So I hash on my block, I keep changing my nonce, and eventually if my nonce plus all the transactions in my block give me that number that's lower than that target, I broadcast it to the network, and everybody else is trying this. Damn it, he got the block, because his math works out. His nonce with those transactions gave us a number lower than a target number. Everybody else is trying to do that same thing. And when we broadcast it, everybody can run the math using my nonce and know that yes, for my block, and then everybody else needs their copy. And now those transactions are no longer in the mempool, they're in the blockchain forever. And here's why. One of the pieces of data from that calculation is a number from the last block. That number is given to the network. It's a transaction ID. When you make a block, you take your transactions that you choose, you take the transaction ID from the last block, which no one can change because that's already on the chain, and then you keep adding that nonce and changing it. So what happens is this. Let's say I create a block, it gets added. Next block gets added on top. That block is using the transaction ID from this block that I just added to the chain. Now, if I go back to that second block in the chain and try to change anything in it, remember, one piece of data in a SHA-256 calculation will change the output at the other end. So if I change a transaction in the second block back, it's going to change the transaction ID, which is going to ripple into the next block forward, and everything will get broken from that point. And so anybody can see if somebody goes back and tries to change a transaction in a previous block, because it will ripple through all the way to the tip of the chain, and nobody will accept the change, because it altered everything downstream of that. And so this SHA-256 thing that's being done is super critical, but also the transaction ID from the previous block, if that is not done right, this chain can't remain, and the security of this chain can't remain. This is like a really key thing. So you got miners grouping transactions in blocks using a transaction ID from the previous block. They hash it together, try to get a number that's lower than a target number. If they do, they broadcast it to the network. They get credit for the block and the brand new Bitcoin that come out with that block. Right? So one of the things I didn't touch on is in this protocol, Bitcoin get released on a schedule. I think we all know there's only ever going to be 21 million. When it started, there were 50 Bitcoin released roughly every 10 minutes. Every 210,000 blocks, that gets cut in half, and we are now down to 6.25 every 10 minutes. I kind of got off track, not sure why I brought that one up, because I know it's in here somewhere. Anyway, let me just keep going with my outline. I apologize, folks. I'm not a professional public speaker. I build houses for a living, in case you guys didn't know. I've been a general contractor for over 30 years. I should have introduced myself in the beginning. One of the reasons I got into this is, as a kid growing up, I took everything apart. I needed to know how it worked. And that's probably why I got into building. But when I heard about Bitcoin, I had to do the same thing. I took it apart mentally. And that's what I'm trying to explain to you folks today. I couldn't trust this until I understood how it worked. So for me, the mechanism of how it works is way more important than why it's here or any of the other great benefits that Bitcoin gives us. So I get deep into this whole technical part, even though I don't know how to write code or anything else. So I'm just looking at my outline. I'm down to something called the signing devices. I know I've covered this. Anyone can have them. There's lots of different types. They send and receive transactions or messages. They can manage your, so I mentioned earlier UTXO. We call that, that's what's known as an unspent transaction output. Just so you understand, any Bitcoin that you have or any messages that you have that you control on that spreadsheet, as long as they're sitting there, they're unspent. As soon as you move them, they're spent, but now they get to the next guy and they're unspent for him. What the network is doing is keeping track of everything that exists right now, everything that is currently unspent. So it's a static picture, and then every 10 minutes it changes, and then there's a new update to the spreadsheet, and wherever things got moved around, it's like, okay, new snapshot. That's it. It's like a one-time thing over and over again, right? So I touched on all these transactions, pub key, private key. Oh, so with ECDSA, this is another very, very interesting thing. So I'm totally not following my script, but I think I'm covering everything. So one of the things that's very interesting about ECDSA, or public-private key cryptography. So this is unique math, very complicated in how it works, but very simple in what it does. So when we create these signing devices, these wallets, we're using this signing protocol we call ECDSA, and I mentioned a new one called Schnorr signatures. Now, it's a really unique thing. What it does is it allows you to have this string of numbers and letters, and you can attach that to a message you want to send to the network. But with the private key that allows you to make the change, you don't want anybody to know what that is. So the way this algorithm works is you can have this private key, and it can create a whole bunch of these what we call public keys, or XPub. And what that is a sort of a representation of the private key, but you can't see the private key. So the way it works is I can sign a transaction. You can receive that transaction, and you, using ECDSA, you can use my public key, run a bunch of math over it, and get an answer that you can absolutely know for sure I have the private key, even though you can't see it. This is really critical because every transaction that goes to the network is checking this. They're running the ECDSA algorithm over the signature to make sure it's a valid signature. Now, since I can't see the private key, how can I validate it? Well, a bunch of really smart people came up with this stuff and said, every single time it always works. If you have the public key, you run this math, you can know for sure they have the private key. Now, therefore, you can trust that that transaction is adhering to the rules, and I'm okay to move it in my spreadsheet, but not until it's in a block. right? So the SHA-256 and the ECDSA are super important cryptographic functions that are sort of technical in how they work, but very simple in what they do. And it's very important to know that they exist. This is one of the reasons why people trust this network. You got an open protocol anybody could join. You've got a system that is perfectly precise. Like ECDSA and SHA-256 are absolute. They don't fail on their own. It's only if you put in bad data. So as long as everybody's following the rules, this stuff doesn't break. And when I talk to you about adding blocks onto the blockchain and taking the transaction ID from one to the other, and that makes the entire blockchain immutable, meaning you can't change anything back there because it ripples through to the front, when technical people get this, they freak out. They're like, holy crap, nothing in the world like this exists. Every other shitcoin blockchain does not have anywhere near the security, even if they use the same features, as this particular network has grown over 13 and a half years. And so when people really look into this Bitcoin thing, they're looking at something that's one of a kind, first ever in the world, and they're realizing, holy shit, no one could really break this thing. It's taken on a life of its own. It's kind of got, we talk about the 10-minute blocks that get added, almost like a heartbeat. This thing is kind of alive. Now, I'm just going to jump through, I've covered most of this stuff, but I want to mention one other thing that's fairly important with understanding Bitcoin. So imagine, I'll use the analogy of gold, which was money. Imagine if gold just became really much more valuable. Oh shit, I got to finish soon, sorry. Imagine if Bitcoin became much more valuable. People would go start trying to dig up more gold. Well, as soon as the supply gets inflated, the price will come down. Bitcoin has a difficulty adjustment. If a whole bunch of miners join the network recognizes that these blocks are coming in faster because there's more people guessing to try and get that number and add a block to the blockchain. So the system is keeping track of how fast blocks get added, and if they're added too fast, they make that number they're looking for, you gotta shoot for that number lower than another number, they make the target harder. And all of a sudden the network slows down. If it starts, if the blocks come in too slow, it makes that difficulty target easier, and all of a sudden the blocks speed up. And we're targeting about 10 minutes. There's other reasons for that I won't get into. The point is, this system regulates itself with no people. The rules are set up, every single computer on the network recognizes it. There's never been anything like this. A computer network that literally regulates its own speed is absolutely fascinating. It's one of these things that makes this Bitcoin thing so unique and really cool. And why millions and billions of dollars are being thrown into it to own some of these digital files within this closed loop network. Remember, the network doesn't see value, it sees messages. We value the messages. We don't have to, but we recognize they're really secure. I can own this message in the digital realm and no one can steal it from me. And I'm the only one who can move it. So I can use it like money. It's not physical, but I can still use it like money for everybody else who understands how the system works. And Bitcoin is becoming digital money simply because of all this strength that it has. I'm going to whip through this really quick because I'd love to answer any questions if anybody has any. Why should you care? I think it can produce wealth for the people that hold it, financial sovereignty, it gives freedom. I think it helps people become more moral and aligned with each other. You might be able to leave a type of legacy behind, and it helps humanity, and there are some threats we might need to worry about. So really quickly, because of the scarcity and everything else, these digital files might become worth more, so it could be worth owning some. I went through things like the halving and the difficulty in trust and all those things. Financial sovereignty, financial sovereignty. Most people's money can be stolen right out from under them. In the Bitcoin network, you feel like you're good. Like the financial sovereignty feeling it's hard to come by. But when you own Bitcoin, once you understand that this wealth cannot be stolen, you feel like, man, you're good, man. I can take my wealth anywhere. That gives you a sense of freedom, I think. I feel way freer than I ever did. I'm not going to go through all these points. What I also think is when you understand the truth and the way the system works, and uncorruptible way it works, you start to see more of morality in society. You look at the people operating in the system, and you see how high the integrity is, and you realize that nobody can lie to anybody, and you start to realize, like, you know, the world works better when we're all aligned on truth. And your own morality improves. I've seen it happen with people. It's really amazing. It's part of this alignment, you know, it's like Bitcoin people are aligned, not just on money or on the protocol. We're aligned on, you know, the government screwing us and the money's broken and health and nutrition. It's amazing what truth will do to a person and how it will align like-minded people. And you're seeing it here, I'm telling you. Anybody you don't know, you walk up to them, you'll start having a conversation, you'll be amazed at how aligned you are. And it builds this community. I have number 6, you know, we're building a community. I think everybody aligns eventually around truth and hard money, and we can have a much more better worldwide community, essentially. You can leave a legacy behind with this stuff. You can improve your reputation. You can do good works because of this good money. You can leave it to your heirs. You might even help humanity, you know, maybe somebody will put a statue in your name someday. Let me just talk about the threats real quick. A lot of people discuss this. We do need to worry about some stuff. Most people think, okay, what about the government? They're gonna get in the way. What if they outright ban it or put restrictions or taxes? So the only thing the government can do is restrict the people that are operating within their jurisdiction. They cannot touch the protocol. They can say it's illegal to use the protocol within these boundaries, and the rest of the world is just going to laugh. Because this is a worldwide network that talks to each other. So no one government can shut it down. They can try to take taxes, but it's going to be a lot harder because they can't necessarily track everybody's funds, depending on how well you secure your Bitcoin. They might try, but none of these things can they do. They can't take over the network. They can't tax everybody very easily. They can't restrict the network. They can only restrict people. One of the other threats is bad code implementation. We have a very big network now that checks itself all the time, so new code getting implemented is not going to be very easy. Way too many eyes on it. It's a potential risk. We've had some bugs here and there, but so far so good. 99.98% uptime in 13 and a half years. No other networks ever had that. It's a one of a kind. You can have humans. One of the threats is humans' incomplete understanding of first principles overall, and then of course money. So that's a threat, but I don't think it's a big one. I think over time people will get it. And then some people would say the overwhelming power of some groups, you know, big rich guys and whatnot. But without getting into the economics of it, there's reasons why no one group can control this whole network. And so that's basically the end of my talk. I hope I covered enough stuff. I always talk way too long. Not really a lot of time for questions, but I'm happy to answer them. Anybody has them? Thank you very much. I can't believe you guys came. Anybody have a question? If you don't, feel free to go to the next seminar. Thank you very much. You folks will probably all knew this shit already, so thank you for coming. I really appreciate this, everybody. It's so nice of you. Have a great day, folks. Thanks.